Welcome back to Ballaholics, the show for those who simply can't get enough of basketball. My name is Sam Israel. We have Sauce on my left.
It's been a while.
On your right.
Oh yeah, true.
It's been a while. It's been a minute. So before we go into actual sports today, we just feel like there's a little bit of an elephant in the room, that needs to be addressed. We have to talk about, obviously me and Sauce are both Binghamton students, and we just want to speak about the events that transpired this past week with two protests occurring. So, Sauce, I want to discuss the first protest with you. I was wondering if you can talk to the viewers and try and summarize the first protest for me.
Yes, and thank you very much, Sam. I think we've talked about it a lot. We want to first inform people about what happened, and we're going to try to do it in an objective, unbiased way. So starting, there was two main protests. The first one that I'm going to discuss took place, I think, November 14th or November 13th. According to, and we're going to use the Beeline reference for kind of a bit we're going to base our information off of. So according to Beeline News, the college Republicans were tabling, but they were tabling. So first of all, the college Republicans are an organization that are SA chartered. So they're like legally allowed by the school. They're chartered, they're official, and everything like that. However, they were with another group called the Turning Point. The Turning Point is an unregistered, unchartered organization at Binghamton, and they were not, by choice, they say in the email, by choice they're not chartered. So it was a combination of the college Republicans and the Turning Point who were tabling. Now, the kind of problem started when they had different provocative signs. So they had a lot of pro-gun violence, pro-gun standpoints, and this was made to be, as the Beeline mentions, provocative. Now, this is something that we'll also discuss later, whether it's provocative or not. But this was also on the same day as the Sagas high school shooting. So there's very good reasons why some people were upset by this. Now, this kind of escalated the situation. People, and according to the Beeline, they said that, it was meant to be provocative, self-evidently, quote-unquote, by the nature of them not being registered, in addition to them, again, having signs supporting gun laws. Now, some protesters went and they actually threw down the table and started getting physical.
So wait, let me just interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is the college Republicans, they were tabling in the marketplace. They were outside the marketplace. Sorry for that. And they were unauthorized to even be where they were. However, that immediately drew protesters in the opposition against them. And what happened was a couple of protesters actually threw down their tables.
Yes. And
they started confiscating their materials as well.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to note that.
Yeah, that's a big point. And as you mentioned, the college Republicans, Turning Point was actually not registered. College Republicans were registered. That's something important to keep in mind. But as you said, the whole situation started escalating. And as you mentioned, protesters threw on the table, and there was kind of direct confrontation with the Republicans and Democrats in this situation. And it started get worse and worse and worse. The university police had to intervene and try to prevent it from going anymore. There was actually no arrest taken either on either side. They stated that they just wanted to kind of de-escalate the situation and tension, and they weren't kind of looking to be punitive, but rather just
de-escalate tensions. Yeah. Because obviously you had these two groups that there was a rising tension, and so the police were called obviously to try and de-escalate that tension.
Yeah.
So my question is, how did the protesters take the police actually intervening?
How about you tell me how that goes? Because I would actually like to know.
Okay, yeah, so I was going to ask for your opinion, but from my opinion, what I got out of it was a lot of the protesters, they didn't like the way the police intervened, and some of them were interpreting it as they were sort of, as BU Progressive Instagram, their last post put, quote unquote, UPD protects and upholds white supremacy. So basically a lot of them interpreted it as they were protecting, the Republicans, and it was sort of a race conflict. And that was what I got out of that phone call, out of what happened.
Yeah, and, I actually had a friend who was there, and again, I wish I was there to kind of more properly report. But yes, there was kind of a lot of reports that it was, I don't want to say initiated, but it was definitely escalated by, in this case, the non-Republicans. So in this case, we'll just say the Democrats for sure.
Okay, well, first, I just want to make an important distinction
for
you guys watching. I know you're referring to the protesters as Democrat, and you're referring to people tabling as Republican. The way I see it, it's not necessarily the Democrats are not necessarily the protesters, and we're not classifying the tablers as necessarily Republicans.
You're right.
So I wanted to point out that distinction, that we cannot classify the protesters as either party, because this is not a party issue. This is based on the person itself. This is based on people, and this is not based on a party. It should not be. Those words should not be used in that.
You're 100% right. From now, I'm going to use protesters and tablers. I think that's a lot more accurate.
Okay.
And that is something to note. It is just, we should also look at it, again, not just as a political issue, but for, this also has potential race issues and such like that as well. But to my knowledge, a lot of protesters did kind of escalate the conflict. I don't want to repeat myself, but that was kind of the whole mentality behind it, where, they have this provocative information. However, when you start ripping down tables and stuff like that, that's when it became a confrontation. It went from a discussion like the best case scenario into a kind of confrontation at that point.
So basically, Sauce, what I'm getting from what you're saying is it all started with a tabling from the college Republicans that tabled outside the marketplace that drew protests because of the provocative posts of gun violence.
Yeah.
So what happened was that increased the tension. Some of the protesters actually threw down the table physically, and they started confiscating materials, and that's where there was a giant tension there.
100%.
That's what led to UPD getting called. Can I also note that, I feel like I need to note this, that this group was there unauthorized, and that administrators actually told them twice, according to the Beeline email, to leave, and they did not leave. They refused those two things.
Exactly.
Let me also just say that at the end, there was no one was arrested, and according to Beeline, they said, the university, that any punishments towards the college Republicans tabling, it's strictly based on them tabling and not based on their beliefs or values.
Yes.
I thought that was an important distinction to point out.
And it should be based on, their infraction with the table in itself, but it shouldn't be based on their values.
Okay.
But that goes more into opinion-based.
And before we go to our opinion-based for these two, I just want to say first, these are strictly our opinions. These are strictly me and Sauce's opinions. These are not BTV6's opinions. I also want to say that we're very open-minded towards all other sides. We pride ourselves in being very objective, trying to be unbiased, looking at all pieces, all sides, all viewpoints of information. If you disagree with our views, if you agree with our views, if you want to be, broadcasted, you are more than welcome to come down to the BTV6 studio. We are located under the marketplace, under Red Mango. You can email me at sisreal3@binghamton.edu. You are more than welcome to attend, to come through and just use this as a platform, and you can also, discuss with us if you want, if you don't like our opinions. I want to point that out there because I know this is a very controversial topic.
It is, and we would love an open discussion. We would love more perspectives on things, and opinions change, and we're open to hearing the other side of the story. And my opinion is not set in stone. I'm very much open to listen to new information. So if you would love to talk about it, we can do so, and it could be in a productive manner. It doesn't have to be anything
and again,
or offensive.
I bring that up because there were lots of controversies surrounding other organizations as maybe being biased or maybe being partial.
Yes.
I'm not saying that's what I say that they are, but people are saying pipe dream, people are alluding to Spectrum or local news stations. We are a home news station. We're a home-fed news station. We are BTV6. And let's go on. We talked about the first protest that transpired.
So there's a second protest.
Against tabling. So I want to talk about the second protest, Sauce.
Yeah.
Do you have any information on that, or would you like me to speak on what I got out of the second protest?
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm going to go speak about the second protest. I actually wanted to attend this protest. I was a little late, and I got there a little late because I was actually at another class.
Oh, wow.
And so when I went to the protest, here's what happened. I don't want to get into what happened with me. Evidently, economist Arthur Laffer worked under the Reagan administration. He got an award from Trump, I believe. Let me see here. He got the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Donald J. Trump.
And that was recent, too.
So, yes, and that was recent. So, obviously, this controversy that's going to stir from that.
Yes.
That's where it all starts. Yeah. And now he's speaking. He really wanted to speak on behalf of the college Republicans, spoke in one of the lecture halls. The university, they took actions because they thought, they preconceived that there could be a rising tensions.
Yeah. So
they did have security guards there. They allocated another lecture hall room for the protesters that weren't satisfied with Arthur Laffer, and they took some other necessary actions I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, long story short, Arthur Laffer goes to speak and is interrupted mid-sentence by a protester that interrupts him, disrupts the entire lecture hall, and does not allow this lecture speaker to speak, to utter he uttered 3 words, 3 sentences,
Yes.
and he was out. This protester then proceeded, after speaking and iterating his stance, got handed a megaphone, my apologies, got handed a megaphone by someone else.
Okay.
And the whole room disrupted. The guy couldn't speak, and he had to be escorted out, and he left.
And
now,
I just also wanted to note and clarify something just for the viewers. The timing on this protest, or the timing on this presentation by Laffer, this was the day after the table incident, was it not?
I believe it was a day or 2 after, but yes, it was definitely a couple days after.
High.
So obviously you have protest number 1, and that's gonna, of course, a lot of the a lot of things that transpired during that protest is gonna move over. It's gonna transfer to this second lecture, to this second protest
exactly.
with Arthur Laffer.
And evidently it did. I mean, a lot of the same tensions and emotions that were there were again carried over into the second one. I want to know just kind of the importance of Laffer in an economics point of view, where, I mean, we learned about Laffer in textbooks, and he basically has a theory that, the lower the tax rate, basically the lower the taxable income, and the highest the tax rate, also the lowest. And it's almost like a upside down horseshoe where basically there's a middle zone. But he is also a world-renowned economist by himself. He's in many textbooks, and the Laffer curve is basically worldwide. It's very well known. So he's very prominent in the economics world.
Yes, I just wanted to speak about Arthur Laffer and give a little brief background. So Arthur Laffer, he says that he never actually made the Laffer curve. It was actually already made, but no one actually ever made an idea.
Interesting.
And how it worked was Arthur Laffer, he was working with Dick Cheney. He was one of Dick Cheney's advisors, I believe, and they were out for food. And Arthur Laffer actually, when he was explaining his idea, apparently, this is just a rumor, he actually, it was popularized by sketching it on a napkin. Basically, what the Laffer curve is the Laffer curve establishes a relationship between tax rates and tax revenue.
Yes.
And basically how it works is a little graph, a little line. Basically, at a 0 tax rate, you are not collecting any revenue because there's a 0 tax rate. Yeah. At a 100% tax rate, you're taxing someone 100%. No one's going to want to work, so you have a 0 tax rate again. Yeah. What the Laffer curve states is that there is some point from 0% to 100% in that tax rate that produces the optimal tax revenue, which is, we'll call it letter T.
Okay.
We don't know where that is. Republicans believe, I'm being objective, Republicans tend to believe that the lower tax rate produces a higher tax revenue. And they just bring that idea from Laffer's curve. They usually use Arthur Laffer, the economist, as a reference, justification for why they believe that.
Right.
So that's basically what I got out of the protest number 2. So now we're going to move on to our opinions overall for each of the protests. Yeah. So if you want to begin and just...
Yeah, sure. I just want to kind of note something just by reading the B-line itself. I kind of struggle with some of it. I think that the B-line did want to do it in an objective fashion, and I think for the most part it did a good job of doing so. There was definitely some points in it that I did think was not objective. And I think that it should be noted and it should be at least acknowledged. So, for example, one thing that I had an issue with is that they said, quote-unquote, self-evidently that the college Republicans were meant to be provocative by the nature of their argument of it being, pro-gun violence. And additionally, they cited the timing with the high school shooting that happened. Now, again, I don't think we should talk about the views strictly, but I do think that, saying self-evidently it was meant to be provocative almost was used as a justification for the actions that soon followed by the protesters. Because it did said that protesters, being provoked, then went to flip the tables and such. And in my opinion, I don't think that there was a justification to flip the tables and escalate the situation and be violent, because that's a violent action. And provocative kind of viewpoints and information is very subjective, and we have to keep in mind what someone means by that. Now, people's level of provocative could be different for everyone. For example, they could have had something, they could have had something about tax rate, for example, like the Laffer, and you could argue that would be provocative as well. But either way, it wouldn't justify an act of violence. So my only problem, again, with the B-line was just they kind of noted that, they didn't support it.
They almost justified the protesters feeling the way they did.
Yes.
They used them physically, knocking down those tables and confiscating the material. And they're trying to say that the gun provoked, that's justified.
Yeah.
They're justified in feeling that way by doing that.
And you are justified to feel offended. And it is justified that you felt provoked, but you are not justified, again,
For your actions.
For your actions.
Yes.
Exactly. You are entitled to feel how you feel. And I think that, they had that right. But what I did not think was right is, not a strict, not an overt justification of the actions, but almost like it was very much leaning towards that. And I want you to say some stuff too as well, so I'll stop for a little bit. But I just want to say there's something called word bias that's incredibly important in psychology and every day. And it's basically the words that we use and the arguments and how we frame them have such an impact in the way that people think. So, this is not just a small issue. Like, by framing this, you're almost conditioned to think a certain way. So I think it's very important for Beeline and for other news outlets to be as objective as possible. Or if they are not going to be objective and show their opinion, at least label it as such. Because my problem with Beeline is that they were framing it as an objective source of information. However, there's clear biases within that. But on the tabling issue, I think we have a lot of the same views on this.
Yes, I just want to get to what you said earlier. I know earlier you were alluding to, making this a Democratic versus Republican kind of issue, and I don't like that at all. I don't like that comparison.
No, that was a mistake.
I know it was a mistake.
Yeah,
I
didn't mean to.
It's hard with the word choice. You used the wrong word.
Because I'm thinking college Republicans.
That's like, I almost think that's more acceptable to say it and then apologize. But like, when you are making an email, you can carefully craft each word, and you know how it sounds before you even say it. So definitely the fact that they put that word in there, and that they meant well. I know what they meant. We all know what they meant.
Yeah.
We know what they meant. They meant their thoughts. And I'm not saying that those protesters were not justified in thinking what they thought. I mean, I do understand why they are thinking the way they are, obviously. However, that does not justify their actions and the physical actions.
Exactly, yeah.
I think something that's very important, a very important issue on campus and just in general, is freedom of speech. And I want to get to that because that was really a common theme, common underlying theme in both of these protests. So number one, obviously, you might not agree with the college Republicans tabling. And before I start, I just want to reiterate, I'm not justifying. I'm not saying I liked what they did. I'm not saying I agreed with the gun violence. They did it on the same day as another high school shooting. Obviously very controversial. What I am saying is, as a citizen of the United States, you are entitled to say what you want to say. You are entitled to have your opinion. That's what makes America so democratic. That's what makes us America. So to physically knock down their table and to confiscate their materials, I deem that is inappropriate. I think that's unacceptable. And if you look at it from the flip side, imagine if that was a Democratic group and the Republicans did that. I think there would be a lot more hysteria on campus.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of note something, like the whole fact that they were, the turn-in group was not registered. I don't think that was...
Oh, yes. Can I catch that, please?
Yes,
because here's what I was hearing. I was hearing that a lot of these protesters, some of them were alleging that they knocked down the table because the college Republicans never signed up to be there.
Right.
We know that's not why. That's not why they did that. That's not why they knocked down those tables. Because there are a lot of groups that aren't authorized to be in certain places. That happens. But you're not going to knock down a table. You want to know the real reason why they knocked down the table? It was quite obvious. It was blatantly obvious. They disagreed with the view. And that is disgusting. That is disgusting. I don't stand for that. To delegitimize someone and physically knock down their tabling because of disagreeing with their views is unacceptable. And that's something that I wanted to get out there.
Yeah, and again, no amount of provocative thing could justify that, in my opinion. That takes it to a different level. And to on your point, often you hear that we have freedom of speech and we have the right to say what we want. And oftentimes, some people may remark, well, you're also free to have the justifications or the consequences of that free speech. However, I do not believe that physical violence or physical acts, even against their own property, like their table, is not justified for how they were speaking. So, you're justified. If you say something in a certain manner, you're free to do so, but you're also allowed to have the consequences against that. But however, these are not fair consequences given what they were saying and the way that they were doing things. And I think that it sets a bad precedent. Because once you start acting violent towards people who disagree with you, you become more and more in the echo chamber. And there's something that I also like to talk, because I like to focus on a psychology basis. It's something called group polarization. Group polarization is a mentality that when you're in a group of like-minded people, your opinions become stronger and stronger towards that same opinion that you had. So if you're in an opinion with a chess club and you guys like chess, you will get very intense and you'll almost be like infatuated with it. Now this happens very much in politics and it happens on both sides. Both sides you can see where you have like-minded people and they have like-minded beliefs, but they actually end up becoming more and more radical. And that's why we've seen such a big bipartisan issue in this country. This is both a political issue, a race issue, a freedom of speech issue. There's many different caveats to this, but that is also something that you should consider. And group polarization is dangerous. This is why we want open discussion, to prevent this from happening. And I think allowing this to be okay is just the beginning of the end.
I have to agree, and I first want to say to you, I'm going to let you talk in a little bit because I need to look up a quotation from a philosopher known as John Stuart Mills, and he had something great to say. He had a fabulous quote, which I'm going to look at once I finish talking and let you talk, because it has to, completely has to do with what you just said. Mm-hmm. And to go on, I want to just go on to protest number 2 and just talk about that and just say this. This economist, whether you agree with him or not, apparently, allegedly, he was paid, they spent $30,000 to get him in that room, and the fact that he was interrupted after uttering 3 sentences, I mean, that's just not right. It's just not right. That's not what we stand for as a country, whether you agree with it or not, whether you agree with his views or the interpretations that you get from the Laffer curve or whatever. I understand that he got the medal from President Donald Trump. Yeah. Obviously, Donald Trump is a very controversial figure. Yeah. I'm not saying I necessarily love Donald Trump either, And it's weird because, again, we were speaking about before about this isn't a Democratic-Republican thing. I know a lot of people and that are Democrats or are liberals that lean to the left and did not agree with what happened, what transpired. Yeah. And I'm sure the people on that side, and this goes both ways as well.
Of course, it does go both ways. It's not black and white.
Mm-hmm. And it's just it's very difficult for me to, look for a way, obviously they can be justified in thinking the way they're thinking, but it's the way in which they went about it, which is what I had a problem with.
And I agree with that.
Now, look, I also have to blame university here. To think it's a good idea to have, to have the speaker in a lecture hall, I would have thought maybe having him in one of those, an auditorium almost, and making it a little more difficult for people to get in that, are unauthorized. I think they should have been a little bit more of a selective process. He's here for economics, so people that like economics want to hear him talk, okay? Mm-hmm. So maybe what you do is people that are economic majors or business majors, they go in and they get to listen to him, because what happens is now there were many economic majors. My business professor went there. One of my business professors in my class wanted to hear him speak. He was super eager and was unable to hear him speak because of what happened, because of what transpired. Yeah. So I'm not saying necessarily have to close it to one major, but I think maybe you make it more of you have to RSVP in advance to go to this event. I'm in school of management, and that's a lot. That's how many of our events are made. You have to RSVP beforehand, maybe give a reason. And I didn't like that they also had the voices, the people that didn't like him in an adjacent lecture hall. That's right there. Yeah. You're not maybe have the speaker in fine arts. Then you have that in the lecture hall. I think they were too close together, and I believe that also that speaker, that protester with the megaphone, he should have been shut down immediately. And I know there's a lot of controversy with that, but if that was President Donald Trump, if that was someone else, you have to get them out. Yeah, because it's unfair to everyone else.
I agree. And if you want to if you're the protester and you want to speak your point, you're allowed to do so. But you could do so at Q&A. You don't interrupt the performance 3 sentences in, because you don't even have a chance to hear what they say. So Sam's looking for the quote right now, but I'm going to just talk about kind of what that means in terms of a freedom of speech kind of point of view. The reason I don't like shutting down the performance 3 sentences in is just very close to something like censorship. And if you can't listen to someone else's argument without having to censor them, you should look into your own argument yourself.
I actually have a quote for that, actually. Let me get to that, because I have the quote there I want to say. I want to talk about that quote for a second. Okay. From John Stuart Mills on liberty. John Stuart Mills basically had something to say on freedom of speech. John Stuart Mills was a philosopher, a British philosopher in the 1800s. Quote, unquote, "In pursuit of the truth, yet even if the opinion is backed by the public judgment of his country or contemporaries, he prevents the opinion from being heard in its defense. He assumes infallibility." Mm-hmm. And so far from the assumption being less objectionable or less dangerous because the opinion is called immoral or impious, this is the case of all others in which it is most fatal. What John Stuart Mills is getting at in that quote is he's talking about people that don't listen to other people's views. They assume infallibility. Infallibility is basically saying I am right in everything, and anything you say is wrong. That is a very fatal thing. That is very dangerous. That's a very dangerous way of thinking.
Yeah.
So, again, like you said before, you have to be able to listen to opposing viewpoints. And also, another thing John Stuart Mill said, I don't have this in quotes. This is based on a philosophy class that I took. When you listen to other opposing views, even if you don't agree with it, it betters you as a person and a better society because you have another viewpoint.
Yeah, exactly. You know more than you've known before.
Exactly. And if you look at previous historical figures, Martin Luther King and Gandhi, these influential figures, they didn't get their agenda passed, they didn't get their agenda across by disrupting people and eliminating freedom of speech. They were peaceful. They did things peacefully. This paints a bad light. This paints a negative light on the college university. And individuals are, you could say, ambassadors of groups. Those represent the group. You represent the group. For example, I am an ambassador of the Jewish religion. I am Jewish. If I were to burn down a Christian church in the name of Judaism, not only does that put me in the bad light, but that puts the Jewish religion as a whole in the bad light. I am saying that translates with anyone in any particular organization. So let's say you are a protester and you have your beliefs. Obviously, you're entitled to have your beliefs. And I'm not dismissing your beliefs by saying your beliefs are wrong. But if your actions, if you are throwing down tables, you're interrupting speakers, you're yelling, that doesn't put your organization in the best light. So, because people make associations between your actions and the group itself. That's one of the main reasons, actually, Martin Luther King and Gandhi really liked the idea of peaceful protests because that's how their groups became associated with. And that's what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is if you are a protester and you're not happy with the direction of what's going on, it's the way in which you handle yourself, the way in which you conduct yourself. And that represents your group. Because, again, you are an ambassador of your group. So it is your duty to make sure that you're putting your organization in the best light.
Whether or not we're talking about the actual substance of the argument itself, it's more about the means.
It's not about race at all. It's not about race.
The means. It's like if you want to have a conversation, or you want to have an argument, or you want to protest, there's a means to do so. And when you use improper means, you actually less people listen to you.
Instead of like I was looking at a news headline. Instead of it being like students have an intellectual debate with Arthur Laffer, the headline was a student mob shuts down an economist. Yeah. That's the news headline because of the way in which you went about it. What I'm saying is you are justified to think what you think. I consider myself to be slightly left. I probably agree with what they're thinking. I don't entirely agree with Arthur Laffer. There are lots of shortcomings with the Laffer curve. There are a ton. However, it is the way in which the students went about it. Yeah. And that's what I really have a major problem with.
No, I agree 100%. Again, it's the means. And like whether or not you agree with the end point and the end values that they have, you have to also look at how you get there and how you express yourself. Shutting down people, that's not like how you're.
It was so ironic because they were yelling when that student with the megaphone was getting booted out. The student body was yelling, "Free speech, free speech." Ironically,
that's crazy.
They weren't letting the speaker speak with his freedom of speech.
Yeah.
I think that was something very notable that went unnoticed. And I didn't even know if I saw that in the B line, the second B line. Maybe it was there. Yeah. Maybe it was there.
Okay. But I don't want to say for sure. But they all tie into each other. That's what happens when you believe that you are infallible and you don't have anything else to learn, and that justifies your viewpoint. There's a quote. Actually, wait, can you go back to that?
Yes, I'll go back.
There's a quote that I wanted to talk about. So I think this quote was said by someone else before that. I thought it was Alexander Hamilton. It might have been Thomas Jefferson, but I couldn't find the original. I found something very close to it. Evelyn Beatrice Hall said this in 1906, but she said, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to your death the right to say it." And I think that is a good embodiment.
That encapsulates these protests and the underlying concept that they need to have, that these people need to have. Yeah. Because, again, freedom of speech is very important. That's an amendment of the United States. That is a foundation of our history.
Yeah, and I think if you could summarize my whole issue with this whole problem in one sentence, this is what it is. Because again, it is not the content or the subject matter of either side that I'm even talking about. Again, it's just about how they did it. And censorship is never going to work. And censorship will just lead us to 1984 George Orwell kind of dystopia. And we're getting closer and closer every day. Every day that we shut down other conversations and we create group polarization and we refuse to listen to opposing viewpoints is how farther we get into this. My worry is that people are not going to learn from this. People are going to do this again in the future.
There were already various speakers.
And this has already been a problem in the past, especially on college campuses. And I think that it would continue. And I think people should be able to express their viewpoints. And I honestly think people should call this out. This behavior should be called out. I can't stress enough the content of these matters are very delicate and they're very subjective. And again,
of course,
I don't even think we're really competent on this.
We're not discussing it at all. We're not talking about at all the actual context of everything. And that's the problem, because we have to be speaking about, we're focused on the freedom of speech, instead of the actual problem itself. Because
we could have a discussion about that as well. But the thing is, if you need such a long conversation about the freedom of speech, how do you have a conversation about the content itself? That is what facilitates it. That's what allows it to happen. And that's how we don't have discussions.
Now, Sauce, I need to ask you a question, actually, because obviously it's difficult. There's a lot of racial oppression that's still going on, still transpiring today. And I know you're not African American, but I know you are a minority. So I want to get that out to the viewers to let them know that you are a minority. You deal with this. And how do you actually go about when people say things to really try and get you angry and try and provoke you?
Yeah.
How are you able to put that aside and just focus and stay level-headed?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, it's incredibly hard. I don't care who you are. It's incredibly hard, and I think I have sympathy for everyone who does deal with that stuff, especially the African American community as well. And I think honestly it's kind of hard to be the bigger person sometimes, and I think it's just kind of a choice that you have to make. I kind of akin it to Martin Luther King. You just that's Jesus that I'm thinking of. Turn the other cheek. But Martin Luther King is nonviolent.
I think you're thinking of Martin Luther King, actually. Martin Luther King? So that's one of my favorite
But
quotes.
also, Martin Luther King and Gandhi also kind of expressed a lot of these same kind of nonviolent protests. Basically, a huge reason that they were so influential in the first place was because of their nonviolence. I think it's easier to resort to violence. It really takes a lot of character to not.
It may feel good short term, but long term it has the long term effects, the really bad effects long term.
Yeah.
And again, talking about the Martin Luther King quote, the one I was thinking of actually, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So I'm not trying to say that you should not be frustrated.
Yeah.
But it's the way in which you go about it. That's what it really boils down to.
And I'm in a position of privilege myself. I think a lot of people have privileges that they don't even realize. And I think it's just important to I think for me the biggest thing that I would be appreciative of, and for a lot of people I do experience this, is just being open and just being willing to hear other people's perspective. And being able to understand and have empathy. I think the biggest thing that you could have if you want to help people is have empathy.
And not being infallible.
Yeah, and not being infallible, because you could be wrong or you could be misinformed and you could learn. And there's nothing wrong with being misinformed and learning or making a mistake and correcting it.
That's why we're saying right now, that we think that we believe what we believe in. We've done some research.
And we could be wrong.
However, we could be wrong. We're not saying we're just 100% certain that we are right, but that's what makes us better, because we know that we're not always right.
Yeah.
And it's being uncertain that actually makes us, in a way, better off and maybe even smarter than a lot of other people that are very infallible.
Yeah, I don't want to say I don't want to go too much of an intelligence thing, but I will say I think it's very a lot of documented that intelligent people actually have the most doubt, because they're able to see different sides. And if you think you're infallible, the something Dunsberg rule basically says that people with low intelligence actually tend to believe that they are infallible and think that they are always right. So the less intelligent you are, the higher of a chance that you have of thinking that you're always right. Again, this is a problem that spans everywhere. I think the biggest thing that people could do to help, and the biggest thing is just have empathy, hear people out, understand other people's viewpoints, or at least try to hear them out. I think that's the biggest thing you could do. And if you do that, that'll help a lot. I think that if I could want one thing, that would be that, because when you're able to have people feel heard, that's where a lot of frustration comes from, So being able to air it out and talk about issues, it's cathartic. Like, another reason for not having these discussions is hard is because we're not able to learn from other people. We're not able to understand other people's viewpoints, and that makes other people who we won't listen to be upset and frustrated, and it becomes. You hang out with people like you, group polarization, become infallible. They're all tied into each other, and they all make a very, very toxic environment.
I agree, Sauce. And I don't really have too much more to add. I really think that we covered a lot of it. Sauce, is there anything else that you want to add right now while you can?
The only thing I would want to add is, I still do have hope. I do think that, we can be better. I think just being aware of it and being, knowledgeable and, I guess, cognizant of it is very important. And I think that, we could get better. But, honestly, on this trajectory, we're not. So, we need to make a conscious effort to, be more open-minded, have more discussions, hear people out. Next time you hear a lecture you disagree with, listen first, and then say your point, and then view your. You should view your point, or you should express your point, but also hear the other person out first. 3 sentences in, he didn't get to say what he wanted to say.
And I want to say, actually, it's very funny because I wasn't even sure. I was very hesitant to actually do this segment because we are primarily a ballaholic show. We are a sports show.
Oh, yeah.
But what transpired these past protests is I had to thank you for really encouraging me to come out and speak
100%.
because I think that these discussions will actually bring about positive changes. And we encourage you guys, if you guys have an outlet, to try and spread, great change
100%.
and to have these thoughtful conversations. If you feel like there's something you got to say, don't let something impress you. Don't let something impress you. You got to do what's right, even if it's hard to do it.
I 100% agree. And this is the last point I just want to make.
You got to wrap it up.
I know. This is the last point I just want to make. First of all, I'm thankful for you being receptive to it. And secondly, I agree with you on if you have a platform, you should share it. People shouldn't be afraid to kind of put their viewpoints out there. And on a last note, you shouldn't just shut up and dribble.
Don't just shut up and dribble. You hear that?
No,
LeBron
100%.
James.
LeBron is GOAT for that. That statement is just amazing. And you should not shut up and dribble. He has an outlet, and he's free to use it however he likes. And he uses it for a lot of good causes. Everyone should do the same. So yeah,
that's a great way to end it. And once again, we want to say these do not express BTV6's views. If you disagree with our views, if you agree with our views, if you want to be on the show, if you want to have a platform, we coordinate. We invite you guys, we invite you viewers to come on the show and express your viewpoints for these kind of matters. We really like to have different perspectives and viewpoints. That's what makes America great. That we have this freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, and we respect everyone's views. Thank you guys for joining us for this segment. These are, we don't really do segments like this typically.
No, we don't.
But so thank you for watching our special segment. And hope you guys, are better from this. And I hope we try to, educate you guys, inform you guys. And obviously we always try to entertain you guys with our views.
Of course.
But thank you guys for watching.